Hello folks, welcome back to the New Year / New Decade celebration, Part 3. We are back in Columbus, Ohio, on January 18th. We are at the High Street Bridge, where we see a northbound CSX grain train as it leaves Parsons Yard. Although the date is January 18th, just 5 months later on June 2nd, this footage was released as John's Trains Adventures, Episode 1, Winter in Columbus, kicking off my YouTube channel, Ohio Pacific Productions. Back then, the channel was known as Ohio Pacific 4446. Originally, I was thinking of calling this channel Ohio Railway Productions because I thought Ohio Pacific would have already been taken, but it wasn't, and when I figured that out, that's when I decided to use the name. The reason why I call the channel Ohio Pacific is because of my fictional railroad, the Ohio Pacific Railroad. As a matter of fact, my channel banner features Ohio Pacific No. 1, a Baldwin locomotive, and Ohio Pacific 511, a former Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range 210-2 locomotive. In my brother and I's fictional universe, Ohio Pacific, Jacob Western, and the Thomas and Eric Railroad are the only Class 1s in the United States to continue operating steam on their systems. Speaking of the JW, I have to also thank my brother for getting me started on this, because if it wasn't for him starting his channel back in 2012, I might have not started my channel at all. Anyway, after seeing this train here, we then saw it again at a parking lot on the Columbus Line subdivision, also known as the Burt Line.
Here it comes, turn it on.
I did. We are in a parking lot along Indianola Avenue, close to the train station, a model train store. We weren't even trying to catch this train. What we were doing was following the old Norfolk Southern's Columbus and Sandusky districts in town to get good ideas for train watching spots. When we got to the place where the Sandusky line paralleled CSX's Burt line, we ran into the grain train and gave it chase until we reached here. After seeing the grain train here, we then saw a CSX coal train and caught it as it entered Parsons Yard. While we were there, we also saw 2 CSX locomotives as they were shunting the yard.
We should be.
Please note, if you decide to come to Parsons Yard, CSX does not like people other than their own employees on the property, so don't hang out on their property. Also, you do have to be careful in this part of town because it's really not a nice part of town either. Anyway, after the coal train, we then relocated to Valley Crossing, where we saw a northbound NS freight getting a crew change. As the crew was getting themselves together, a southbound NS intermodal train came roaring on by. Well, when this episode was made, John's Strange Adventures episode 1, it really was a simpler time back then. Basically, I didn't have a really good mic, resulting in the audio quality being really bad. I didn't really know how to edit videos as well as I do now. And, well, yeah, it was an interesting time, I can say that for sure. Another thing about these videos, well, my earlier videos, is sometimes I would basically record something and then it'd have some sort of slur in there, or I'd have trouble pronouncing something or spelling something for that matter, and I'd just think to myself, it was good enough. I can definitely say I've hopefully gotten much better than that. Also, please note, this whole section right here was unscripted, and back then I barely did any scripting, so it goes to show how better I got. After the intermodal train cleared the junction, the Norfolk Southern freight train then got underway. Yeah. As this train was going on by, my SD card ran out of space, ending our day here. I still find it funny that this episode has 518 views on it. If any of you guys have seen this episode, tell me what you guys thought about it in the comment section down below. After revisiting episode 1, we now move on to Lockbourne, Ohio, on February 23rd. We are at the abandoned Lockbourne Road Bridge, just south of town, where we see NS 6711 shunting some intermodal cars into Rickenbacker Yard. Rickenbacker Intermodal Terminal is a $68.5 million facility designed to expand Norfolk Southern's intermodal business in central Ohio. The yard was built back in 2008 as part of the Rickenbacker Global Logistics Park. The yard is comprised of 175 acres and can handle more than 250,000 containers and trailers annually. The abandoned Lockbourne Road Bridge provided an excellent view of Rickenbacker Yard, including the engine track. We then relocated back to Lockbourne, where we saw an NS southbound intermodal train as it entered into Rickenbacker Yard. Rickenbacker Yard was made as part of Norfolk Southern's Heartland Corridor. The Heartland Corridor is a route that runs from Chicago to Norfolk, Virginia via Columbus, Ohio. The route also connects Fort Wayne, Indiana, Detroit, Michigan, and Cincinnati, Ohio. The corridor was made between 2007 and 2010 as a public-private partnership between Norfolk Southern, the Federal Highway Administration, and 3 U.S. states to improve railroad freight operations. The train came to a stop here, so we moved to the small town of Duval, south of Rickenbacker Yard. As we made our way there, we then saw Lehigh Valley 8104 and Monongahela 8025 as they were shunting the yard. Fun fact, when 8104 came out of the paint shop, it originally had a single yellow stripe across the front surrounding the Lehigh Black Diamond logo. After a few months in service, the engine was then repainted into its current scheme. After the heritage units got back into the yard, a CSX southbound coal train came roaring on by. This is CSX's northern subdivision, and back then it had a good flow of trains using it. As a matter of fact, we saw at least 3 trains during our time here. Also, as the train rolled on by, there were some Conrail and Chicago and Northwestern coal cars on board. Back then, some of the Conrail coal cars were owned by CSX. Sitting on the middle track was another NS intermodal train with a standard cab leading. The most iconic part of Duval was the giant grain facility next to the NS main line. As the heritage units were shunting the yard, a northbound CSX trash train came running on by. After the trash train came on by, the intermodal train we saw at Lockbourne came on by as well, shunting its train into the yard. The yard here isn't big enough to fit an entire intermodal train at once, so in order to fit the trains, they have to be split in two. The yard is designed to be expanded if necessary. Duval Road is a great place to watch the action of Norfolk Southern and CSX trains as they roll on through the town. At the time of our visit, a project was begun to relocate Duval Road onto a bridge to stop traffic jams from happening in the small town. This entire trip was featured in John's Trains Adventures Season 1, Episodes 5 and 6. So if you wish to see all the trains we caught here, you can go check that out. I'll leave a link for them down in the description box below. After our visit to Duval Road, we then returned to Burnside, Kentucky on March 27th. The reason why we were here was because we were on a trip to see Southern Railway 630 pull 2 21st Century Steam Program excursions out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. As part of this trip, my dad, brother, and I explored the Rat Hole line from here down to Chattanooga. As we stand atop the cliffs overlooking the impressive Burnside Bridge, we then see a southbound NS intermodal train as it comes crossing the bridge. Once the head end of this train got across the bridge, it began to slow down in order to stop at the Burnside Depot. Once the train came to a stop at the depot, the crews were then swapped out. Once the crew change happened, the train was then back underway. Although Burnside Bridge is an icon of Burnside, there is another good spot to see trains here. The date is now March 28th, and we are on the south side of Burnside, where the tracks go through a cut in the mountain. From the cliffs, you can get a good view of the trains as they come in and out of Burnside. We then see a southbound NS freight as it comes running through the cut. Not only is the Rat Hole line known for its tunnels and bridges, it's also known for its deep cuts, many of which used to be tunnels. After seeing this train here, we then ended up in Stearns, Kentucky, home to the Big South Fork Scenic Railroad. Here we saw Big South Fork number 106 as it was shunting the yard here in Stearns. From the Stearns Depot, you can watch trains of Norfolk Southern as they roll through here, climbing the mountain. You can also take a ride on the Big South Fork Scenic Railroad and see the beauty of Kentucky. If you wish to ride the Big South Fork, you can go visit their website at https://www.bsfsry.com for more information there. Also, if you wish to see all the trains we caught on this trip, you can go visit my video, Rails of the South, Volume 2, Down the Rat Hole. I'll leave a link for both Rails of the South and the Big South Fork Scenic Railroad down in the description box below, so you can go check that out. After exploring the Rat Hole, we then arrived in Chattanooga, Tennessee, that afternoon. My plan for this trip was to chase 630 as it pulled an excursion train from here to Attala, Alabama and return. Then the next day, chase 630 again to Oneida, Tennessee and return home.
I know, I'm just looking at the coaches.
Unfortunately, the day we left, on March 27th, the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum announced that 630 had some firebox issues which needed to be sorted out, and as a result, 630 could not pull both excursions. We did not know this until we arrived at the Grand Junction Depot to see Southern 8099 pulling the excursion train. Where's the steam engine? After a bit of discussion, we then decided to chase the train anyway. After all, we came down here to chase a train, so we were going to do it. Later in the day, March 29th to be exact, we were in Fort Payne, Alabama, where we saw a northbound NS freight being led by a standard cab. We're at the old Fort Payne Depot, home to the Fort Payne Depot Museum. The depot was built in 1891 for the Alabama Great Southern Railway. Ownership of the depot was then later acquired by the Southern Railway and by its successor, Norfolk Southern. In 1985, the depot was slated for demolition, but thanks to a group of people in town, it was saved, and a year later, in 1986, it was reopened as the museum, which still operates to this day. If you wish to see the Fort Payne Depot Museum, they are located at 105 5th Street, Fort Payne, Alabama. They are open Wednesday, Thursday, Friday from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. and Sundays from 2 to 4 p.m. You can also visit their website at http://www.fortpaynedepotmuseum.com for more information there. I'll leave a link down in the description box below so you can go check that out for yourself. A little while after this train came on by, our excursion train then came through town on its return journey back to Chattanooga, Tennessee. Unfortunately, due to time, there were some things I had to leave out of this section of the video. So, if you wish to see all the stuff we got into during this trip, you can go visit my video, Rails to the South, Volume 3, Deeper South, which covered this section of this trip. After our trip down south, we then returned to Ohio on April 19th. We are just northwest of Wellington, Ohio, on the Lorain and West Virginian Railway, ironically nowhere close to West Virginia, where we see a blast from the past coming towards this crossing. Central Pacific 63, the Leviathan, has come to the Lorain and West Virginian Railroad to pull some excursions over their rails. We arrive back at the Lorain and West Virginia's Wellington Depot, where we see CP-63 and LNWV 101 as they sit side by side. As much as I would love to say Leviathan was built in 1868, that would simply be not the case. This Leviathan is a replica locomotive built in 2005 by David H. Kelk of the Kelk Locomotive Works in Elgin, Illinois. The original Leviathan was unfortunately scrapped in the early 1900s. Ever since its debut in 2009, it has toured the Midwest and some parts of the Northeast, visiting scenic railroads and museums while doing so. As of 2019, the Leviathan is running at Steam into History in New Freedom, Pennsylvania. At the time of our visit, the Leviathan wasn't the only steam locomotive in town. Sitting on a siding just north of the depot is Nickel Plate Road 384. 384 is a B5060 built in 1944. The engine is owned by the Lake Shore Railway Association, an associate group of the Lorain and West Virginian Railroad. They hope to restore the locomotive to working order sometime. Sadly, as of 2019, the engine is still not operational, and work on the engine is slow at best. Soon it was time for Leviathan to pull another excursion down the Lorain and West Virginian Railroad. If you wish to visit the Lorain and West Virginia Railway, they are located at 46789 Route 18, Wellington, Ohio. You can also check out their website at https://www.lnwv lwvry.org for more information there. I'll leave a link for the website down in the description box below so you can go check that out. Before we left Wellington, we then went into town where we found a small rail park dedicated to the old Big Four. The park is along CSX's Greenwich subdivision, which sees many trains. Speaking of which, we then saw an eastbound CSX freight train as it rolled through town. In case you're wondering about the sirens, that's from an ambulance and 2 police cars that got caught at the crossing just behind the camera. This trip was covered in John's Trains Adventures, Episode 9, Leviathan at Wellington. I'll leave a link down in the description box below so you can go check out that video. Although, do be warned, anything in Season 1 will still probably have bad quality in audio and probably some bad misspelling, so fair warning there. After our trip to Wellington, we then returned to Lockbourne on May 25th. On this day, my dad, brother, and I saw 4 classic diesels as they went underneath the abandoned Lockbourne Road Bridge. On this day, NKP 190, Suit Line 2500, CB&Q 9911, and CNNW 411 were traveling down the Columbus District, bound for Spencer, North Carolina. Here we see the train as it goes under the overpass just northwest of Kingston, Ohio. We then tried to chase this train into Chillicothe, but to no avail. But we did see a southbound NS freight train come right through town. The reason why those 4 streamliners were heading for Spencer, North Carolina, was for Streamliners at Spencer, an event hosted by the North Carolina Transportation Museum to celebrate the classic streamlined era of railroading. From May 29th to June 1st, many streamlined locomotives, mostly diesels, came to Spencer from around the United States to take part in photo ops and special excursions on Norfolk Southern's main line. Nickel Plate Road 190 came from the Oregon Rail Heritage Center in Portland, Oregon. Sioux Line 2500 came from the Lake Superior Railroad Museum in Duluth, Minnesota. Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy 9911, and Chicago and Northwestern 411 came from the Illinois Railroad Museum in Union, Illinois. But the most anticipated visitor of this event was Norfolk and Western 611, the only streamlined steam locomotive to participate in this event. Back in February 2013, a campaign called Fire Up 611 was started by the Virginia Museum of Transportation in order to put NNW 611 back on the rails for use in the 21st Century Steam program. By 2014, the campaign was very successful in raising the money, and by May, 611 was towed from her home in Roanoke, Virginia to Spencer, North Carolina for restoration. Once the Streamliners at Spencer event is over, the restoration of 611 began in earnest. A little bit after this NS freight train came through town, a northbound NS coal train then came through town as well. This trip was featured in John's Train Adventures, Episode 11. I'll leave a link down in the description box below so you guys can go check that out if you wish. We now move back to Columbus, Ohio on June 14th. We are at the High Street Bridge where we see Indiana and Ohio 95 and 4070, two ex-Southern Pacific locomotives, as they pull a ballast train into Parsons Yard. I&O 9500 is a rebuilt EMD SD45R built in 1966 as Southern Pacific 8809. I&O 4070 is a classic EMD SD40T-2 tunnel motor built in 1978 as Southern Pacific 8529. My most favorite railroad is the Southern Pacific Railroad, and seeing both these engines pull this train was absolutely fantastic. 3 months back, on March 26, my dad ended up on a small chase with I&O 9400, another SP tunnel motor still wearing its speed lettering and colors for the Southern Pacific. He first caught the train at the Alkire Road Bridge north of Grove City, Ohio. After seeing the train here, he then ended up chasing the train into downtown Columbus. Southern Pacific 9400 is an EMD SP40T-2 built in 1975 for the St. Louis Southwestern Railroad. It later became an SP locomotive in the early 1990s. Shortly after my dad filmed this, the SP lettering was painted over on 9400. Although the engine still wears its SP colors, it no longer has its SP lettering. After seeing the old Southern Pacific in action, we then went on a trip to Owasso, Michigan on June 21st. We are at Train Expo 2014. Hosted by the Steam Railroading Institute, Train Expo 2014 is a celebration of trains. There are also other events happening here, such as car and air shows, but we'll mainly focus on the trains. There were many steam locomotives present here at this event. We had the familiar faces, such as Nickel Plate Road 765, Lehigh Valley Coal Company No. 126, and Central Pacific No. 63, the Leviathan. Of course, they weren't the only steam engines in attendance. There was also Flag Coal Company No. 75, Little River Railroad No. 1 and 110,
No, wait a minute.
Visco's Company No. 6, and the Steam Railroading Institute's very own Pere Marquette 1225, another Berkshire.
Sorry.
During Train Expo, there were 2 public excursion routes scheduled for the event. The first one we saw was the Saginaw-Owasso Run, being hauled by Lehigh Valley Coal Company No. 126 and Viscose Company No. 6. This run was mainly being handled by the smaller locomotives. The second excursion was the Alma-Owasso Run, being hauled by Pere Marquette 1225 and Nickel Plate Road 765. Here we saw 1225 as it pulled back in with the Alma excursion. Pere Marquette 1225 is an N1 Class 284 Berkshire built in 1941 by the Lima Locomotive Works. It stayed as part of the Pere Marquette Railroad until the merger with the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad on June 6, 1947. Sadly, just 4 years into the C&O merger in 1951, 1225 was retired and sent to a scrapyard in New Buffalo, Michigan. But in 1955, 1225 was pulled from the deadline and cosmetically restored and donated as a gift to Michigan State University. 1225 was received by Michigan State in 1957 and put on display near Spartan Stadium in East Lansing, Michigan. In 1969, the Michigan State University Railroad Club was formed, and in 1971 they started the restoration of 1225 to put the engine back into working order. By 1983, the club became the Michigan State Trust for Railway Preservation and managed to acquire 1225 from Michigan State. The group then moved 1225 to its current home in Owasso, Michigan, and on November of 1985, 1225 moved under its own power for the first time, which began its excursion career. A little bit after that, the group became known as the Steam Railroading Institute. In 2010, 1225 went under an annual 15-year rebuild, and by 2014 the engine returned to service. As of 2019, 1225 is still an excursion service. So if you wish to ride behind 1225, you can go visit their website at https://www.michigansteamtrain.com for more information there. I'll leave a link in the description box below so you can go check them out. As soon as the passengers were off, 1225 then pulled the train up so 765 could couple up to the north end of the train for the afternoon run to Alma. As soon as 765 was on the train, we then chased 765 as it made its return trip back from Alma to Owasso. This whole trip was covered in John's Trains Adventures, Episode 14, Train Expo 2014, Owasso, Michigan. That video was a milestone for me because it was the first video on my YouTube channel to get over 1,000 views in less than a month. When I saw that video get over 1,000 views, I was pretty much shocked. I didn't realize that that's how popular my video would get. So I truly thank you guys for liking and viewing that video. After our trip to Train Expo, we then started our way home the next day. On our way home, we stopped in Toledo back at Vickers. By June 22nd of this year, the overpasses here were finally open, eliminating the railroad crossings here. Although the railroad crossing gates at Juilliard Road were still in place, they wouldn't be for long. We then saw a westbound NS intermodal train as it came underneath the classic NYC signal bridge. After our trip to Michigan, we then went on another trip back to Cleveland on July 2nd. On this day, my mom, brother, and I visited the Great Lakes Science Center in downtown Cleveland, right next to Lake Erie. The museum has many exhibits here, featuring many things from space exploration to engineering. But by far their biggest exhibit here is the William G. Mather, a retired Great Lakes iron ore carrier. The William G. Mather was launched on May 23, 1925 by the Great Lakes Engineering Works in Ecorse, Michigan, south of Detroit. The Mather was the flagship of the Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company and was named after the company's president at the time, William Gwynn Mather. The ship transported iron ore across the Great Lakes until 1980, when it was taken out of service. Then, on December 10, 1987, the William G. Mather was then donated to the Great Lakes Historical Society of Toledo so they could turn the ship into a museum. The ship was then moved to Cleveland for restoration a year later. By 1994, the Society divested themselves from the Mather due to a growing movement to keep the ship in Cleveland. On July 22, 1995, the Mather was then acquired by the newly formed Harbor Heritage Society. By June 15, 2003, the mayor of Cleveland for the time, Jane L. Campbell, signed a deal with the Harbor Heritage Society to have the ship stay at its current home at East 9th Street berth and become part of the Science Center complex. As for the Great Lakes Historical Society, they ended up getting another iron ore ship. If you wish to come and see the Great Lakes Science Center and the William G. Mather, they are located at 601 Erie Side Avenue, Cleveland, Ohio. They are open Tuesday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. You can also go check out their website at http://greatscience.com. I'll leave a link down in the description below for them as well. After seeing the Mather, we then saw another ship nearby, the USS Cod, a World War II American submarine. The Cod is a Ghetto-class submarine launched on March 21, 1943. When the USS Cod officially joined the U.S. Navy, it was stationed in the Pacific Theater, where it did many patrols and sunk many enemy ships. On July 9th and 10th of 1945, the Cod rescued the crew of the Dutch submarine O-19 after they got grounded on a coral reef. After some unsuccessful attempts by the Cod to try to free the Dutch submarine, they ultimately had to destroy the sub in order to keep it from falling into enemy hands. This was the only sub-to-sub rescue in history. After the rescue, on August 13, 1945, the crew of the O-19 invited the crew of the Cod to a party celebrating the rescue. During the party, both crews learned of the Japanese surrender, making it a party to remember. After the war, the sub stayed in the U.S. Navy until December 15, 1971, when the sub was taken out of service and struck off the U.S. Navy Vessel Register. When the sub was taken out of service, it was in Cleveland at the time. A group of Cleveland residents formed the Cleveland Coordinating Committee in order to save the Cod from scrapping. The group was successful in acquiring the Cod on January of 1976 and turned the Cod into a museum ship, which it still is today. If you wish to come and see the USS Cod for yourself, they are located at 1201 North Marginal Road, Cleveland, Ohio. They are open Saturday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. You can also visit their website at http://usscod.org for more information there. I'll leave a link down in the description box below so you can go check them out. Not too far from both the sub and the ship is Norfolk Southern's main lines, which run right along the lakefront. Here, Norfolk Southern's Chicago line, the double-tracked main line in the middle, and the Cleveland line, the farthest double track, run side by side. We then saw an eastbound NS Manifest freight with a special Union Pacific locomotive in tow. Union Pacific 2002 is an EMD SD70M built in 2001. UP 2002 and 2001 were both painted for the 2002 Salt Lake Winter Olympics and got to participate in the torch relay. As of 2019, both 2002 and 2001 are still running on the Union Pacific Railroad and still wear their Olympic colors. As this train rolled through town, a westbound NS ethanol train then came by, with Penn Central 1073 trailing. RTA's Waterfront line, the closest track, which is under the catenaries, also runs through here as well. Although NS's Chicago line and Cleveland lines run side by side here, most of NS's freight traffic will ultimately use the Cleveland line here, as the Chicago line actually ends here and turns into CSX's Cleveland Terminal subdivision. So there is a chance that you may see some CSX action here as well. Amtrak also comes through here as well, the Capital Limited using the Cleveland line, while the Lake Shore Limited uses the Chicago line. Both trains mainly run through here at night though. And for our last train we saw here, we then saw an RTA car as it ran right by us. After our trip to Cleveland, we then returned to Lockbourne on July 8th, where we saw another special engine. But before we saw that engine, we first saw a northbound NS intermodal train as it was preparing to depart Rickenbacker Yard. The intermodal train had left half of its train on the siding next to the main line and was reconnecting to it to continue its journey north. After the intermodal train got coupled up, we then moved south to the Wigan Road Bridge, where we saw a southbound CSX freight as it came running on by. After the freight train came on by, we then went back up to Duval Road just before dark, where we saw another intermodal train shunting the yard, and this is where we saw the special locomotive. NS 6920 is a rebuilt EMD SD60 built in 1986 as an SD60 for the Chicago Northwestern as 8014. In early 2012, Norfolk Southern acquired 8014 and made it as NS 6515, but it would only have that number for a very brief time, as later on in the year it was then sent to the Altoona Locomotive Works to get rebuilt as NS 6920 and painted into this scheme to honor our veterans. After seeing 6920, my mom, brother, and I then went on another trip, this time to Bellevue, Ohio, on July 25th. It was my birthday today, and to celebrate it, we decided to come up here to see all the trains. Bellevue is a very busy junction town where Norfolk Southern's Sandusky District crosses over the Cleveland, Fostoria, and Toledo districts. This is also where the Wheeling and Lake Erie Railroad interchanges with NS. The best place to see all the rail action here is at Kepler Rail Park on Monroe Street. We first see a northbound NS freight train as it enters into Bellevue Yard with a colorful engine contest. Union Pacific 9174 is a GE C40-8 built in 1988. As the train continues to roll into the yard, a former Norfolk and Western steel car with a former Grand Trunk Western and Burlington Northern cover passes by us. A little while after this train came into the yard, we then saw an NS Triple Crown train enter the yard as well, with a BNSF locomotive leading it. Triple Crown is a trucking company that was started in 1986. The goal for them was to transport auto parts from manufacturers in St. Louis, Missouri to automobile plants in Detroit, Michigan. Instead of trucking their trailers all the way to their destinations, Triple Crown decided to use road railers to get their trailers to where they were supposed to go. As you can see, road railers are trailers with specially made bogies that go underneath the trailers in order to get them to go on the rails. What would usually happen is the trailer would be loaded up at a warehouse or another trucking facility. Then, once the trailer was loaded, it was then trucked to a special Triple Crown rail yard, where it was parked on a platform track, and special bogies would then be placed under the back end of the trailer. These bogies would also be able to connect to the front end of other trailers to help make up a long train. Once the train was made up, it was then given a locomotive and taken over the rails to its destination, avoiding the highway system. Once at its destination, the train would enter another Triple Crown rail yard, where the bogies would then be taken off the trailers, and then the trailer would be trucked to its final destination. At this time, in 2014, Triple Crown had many routes across both Norfolk Southern and parts of BNSF to connect many cities such as Dallas, Texas, Kansas City, Missouri, and Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and many others. Even back during the 1980s and 90s, they also ran over Conrail, hence the reason why there are Conrail markings on some of the trailers. Sadly, by the end of 2015, Norfolk Southern announced that it would be cutting back its Triple Crown trains and have only one of those trains still on its system, run between Detroit, Michigan, and Kansas City, Missouri. As of 2019, that train is still going, but the future of road railer service is in doubt. As these Triple Crown trailers come rolling on by, you can see that they weren't the only ones in the road railer business. Swift Transportations, probably inspired by Triple Crown, also had their own road railer trains running in the 90s, but they were discontinued in the early 2000s. Amtrak would also have their own road railers, but instead of attaching them to their own trains, they normally have them on the backs of their long-distance or short-distance passenger trains to get them to their destinations. Sadly, this service was discontinued as well. After the Triple Crown train got into the yard, we then visited the Mad River and Nickel Plate Railroad Museum. The museum is a large complex home to many pieces of railroad equipment and artifacts. When you first walk into the building, one of the first things you'll see in there is the Sandusky, a wooden and plaster replica of the first locomotive to ever work in the state of Ohio. Across the street from the first building is a small yard full of many of the museum's locomotives and cars. Here you can walk into the boxcars and see some interesting displays of railroad-related items. There are 3 interesting locomotives here just in this yard alone. Nickel Plate Road 329 and Alco RSD 12, Nickel Plate Road 900 and EMD GP 30, and Wabash 671 at EMD F7, which was being repainted at the time. While exploring the museum yard, you can still see the mainline action here as we saw an eastbound Autorack train come by. Besides this yard, the museum has another yard here. Just on the other side of Norfolk Southern's Toledo District main line is the other yard, full of more locomotives and equipment. Residing in this yard is Norfolk and Western 2349 and EMD SD9. The engine was originally built for the nickel plate as 349, but when the museum acquired the locomotive, it was decided to put it back into its Norfolk and Western heritage. Trust me, this place is a must-see for any rail fan or nickel plate fanatic. They are located at 253 Southwest Street, Bellevue, Ohio. They are open throughout the week from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. You can also visit their website at https://www.madrivermuseum.org for more information there. I'll leave a link down in the description box below so you can go check that out as well. I also made this into a 2-part episode on my YouTube channel as John's Train Adventures episodes 20 and 21. I'll leave a link down in the description box below so you can go check that out as well. After our visit to Bellevue, we then went on another trip to Cumberland, Maryland on the 16th and 17th of August. We are at the former Western Maryland Depot on the Western Maryland Scenic Railway, where we see Western Maryland 734 as it comes across the North Branch Potomac River. .734 is a 280 consolidation type built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1916. The engine was built for the Lake Superior and Ishkaming Railroad as their 34. It stayed in operation there until 1951, when it was retired and then purchased by the Illinois Railroad Museum and set up on display. It stayed at IRM until 1991, when it was then purchased by the Western Maryland Scenic Railway for restoration. In 1993, after a 3-year restoration, the engine was fired up for the first time. Now let's take a ride on the Western Maryland and take this train all the way to Frostburg. When the train leaves Cumberland, Maryland, it first enters the Cumberland Narrows, a small gorge that was vital to westward expansion for the United States. Not only is our line here, but there is also the former B&O main line, which is now CSX, and a national highway, Route 40, that also comes through here as well.
Oh, careful, brother. Your bridge comes up pretty quick.
In 2014, the Western Maryland made headlines when they announced that they had purchased Chesapeake and Ohio 1309 and H6 2662 Mallet. The plan was to restore the locomotive to better the new condition and have it operate here on their railroad. We now see 734 as it goes around Horseshoe's little brother, Helmstedter's Curve. Although Helmstedter's Curve is the highlight of the run, another highlight on this route would have to be Brush Tunnel. The tunnel is a 914-foot bore under a hill which was built in 1911 by the original Western Maryland Railway.
Gotta be out of that.
Dude, I think I might go back to home then.
Damn.
It's, oh well.
Hey, is the conductor coming, brother?
I don't know.
Check the window.
By the end of 2015, Western Maryland 734 was taken out of service for her annual 1472 inspection and overhaul. As of 2019, Western Maryland 734 is still out of service. And as for 1309, it's still under restoration with no end in sight. As the train gets closer to Frostburg, We then leave the old Wild Mary and enter onto the former Cumberland and Pennsylvania Railroad right-of-way. Once onto the old C&P, we then cross over the old W&M twice on 2 bridges. We now watch as Western Maryland 734 as it enters into the Frostburg Depot. Once the train arrives in Frostburg, passengers are allowed to disembark the train. Passengers can either go and explore Frostburg, or watch as 734 goes around the turntable here in Frostburg.
Some guys with 6 cars for free telling them how that's no good, you know? That's what built this country. They fail to realize it.
If you wish to come and ride the Western Maryland Scenic Railway, their main station in Cumberland is located at 13 Canal Street, Cumberland, Maryland. You can also go to their website at https://wmsr.com for more information there. I'll leave a link down in the description box below so you can go check that out. I also made this into my video, John's Train Adventures, Episode 22, on the Western Maryland. This is my first full-length documentary. I'll leave a link down in the description box below so you can go check that out as well. After our visit to Cumberland, we then went to the waters in Louisville, Kentucky on October 17th. On this day, my mom, brother, and I, and many other people were here to celebrate the 100th birthday of the Belle of Louisville, a stern-wheeled riverboat. Although the Belle didn't turn 100 until the next day, from the 14th to the 19th, the city was pretty much doing a 6-day celebration in honor of this historic occasion. Not only were there many people here, but 5 other riverboats also came here to celebrate with the bell. Moored at the dock, we see the Spirit of Jefferson, the Spirit of Peoria, and the biggest of them all besides the Belle of Louisville, the Belle of Cincinnati. The Spirit of Jefferson is based out of Louisville, Kentucky. The Peoria is based out of Peoria, Illinois. And the Belle of Cincinnati, as we already know, is based out of Newport News, Kentucky, which is just right across the river from Cincinnati, Ohio. For this tremendous occasion, we are in Waterfront Park, located right in downtown Louisville on the Ohio River. There are many bridges that cross the mighty Ohio River into Louisville, but today there is only one bridge left that still carries the railroad across the river. The Falls of the Ohio Bridge is a 5,218 feet through truss vertical lift span bridge. While we were on the waterfront, we then saw a CSX autorack train crossing the bridge. The bridge is owned by the Louisville and Indiana Railroad, a short line railroad that runs from here to Indianapolis, Indiana. CSX has trackage rights on the entire railroad to Indianapolis. The original bridge was built in 1870, but it was then rebuilt in 1919 to its current state. As a matter of fact, the bridge still uses its original stone columns to support itself. As the train was crossing the bridge, we then saw the birthday girl as she went downriver. Although we did see 4 trains use the bridge, one of which was the same train, the riverboats really stole the show. The Belle of Louisville was launched on October 18, 1914 by the James Reese & Sons Company of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She was originally named Idlewild, and her first career was taking passengers from Memphis, Tennessee to West Memphis, Arkansas, on the Mississippi River. In 1962, she was then purchased by Judge Marlowe Cook. By this point, the city of Louisville had lost interest in its waterfront, and Judge Marlowe was hoping to re-energize that interest by buying the Idlewood and running it in Louisville. Luckily, his plan worked, and that's when the ship was then renamed into the Belle of Louisville. Ever since then, she has been an icon of the city. Such as the Statue of Liberty is a stable of New York, the Belle of Louisville has been a stable of Louisville. Besides the sternwheelers, there are other riverboats here as part of the festivities. Moored at the docks was the Osage, a Coast Guard river tug, and the MV Ronald L. Lugmiller, an ACL tug. Among the tugboats was the W.P. Schneider Jr., one of the oldest river tugs here in the celebration. The Schneider was launched in 1918 by Reese & Sons Company of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She was built to tow barges for Carnegie Steel. In 1955, she was then given to the Ohio Historical Society to be used as an exhibit at the Ohio River Museum in Marietta, Ohio, where she has stayed ever since. Well, with the exception of this celebration. She was towed all the way from Marietta, Ohio, down to here just to participate in this event. After the celebration was over, she was then towed back to Marietta, where she still resides today. We then saw the Spirit of Jefferson as it was cruising down the Ohio River. Of course, the riverboats weren't the only ones on the river. While we were here, we managed to get tickets to take a river cruise on the Belle of Louisville. We were some of the first people to actually get on board the ship, and we managed to acquire some great seats on the upper deck. While everyone else was still boarding the Louisville, we then saw a Louisville and Indiana Railroad train as it crossed the river into Louisville, Kentucky. If you wish to come and ride the Belle of Louisville, their address is 401 West River Road, Louisville, Kentucky. You can also visit their website at https://belleoflouisville.org for more information there. I also made this into John's Train Adventures episode 24. I'll leave a link for both the website and my video down in the description box below so you can go check it out. After our trip to Louisville, we then went back home and didn't do much until 2015. We now go back to Lockbourne, Ohio on January 1st, 2015 in the new year. When Christmas 2014 came around, I got some new cameras, and boy does it show. I mean, look at all this detail we got now. Well, anyway, the footage you're watching right now came from my then new Canon Vixa HFR 500, which had replaced my Sony DCR XS45. We are at Duval Road. By this point, that bridge we saw back in 2014 had already been finished and now carried Duval Road across the railroad tracks. Although the crossing was still in place, barriers had been put up to prevent motorists from trying to cross the crossing. Sitting on the sidetrack was an NS intermodal and autorack train. It would set out its intermodal cars into Rickenbacker Yard before continuing south with its autorack cut. We then caught a northbound NS grain train, making it the first train I caught with my new cameras. And yes, I meant to say cameras. Not only did I get the HFR 500, but I also got the GoPro Hero 3. And this is what the GoPro's footage looked like. After the grain train got by, we then moved to the abandoned Lockbourne Road Bridge. The reason why we had came out here on this day was because I had heard that Delaware, Lackawanna and Western 1074 and Conrail 8098 were at Rickenbacker Yard this day. A little bit after seeing the heritage units, we then moved down to Asheville, Ohio, where we saw the NS Intermodal and Autorack, now just an Autorack train, come roaring through town. We now head back to Columbus on January 17th. On this day, we were just looking around for trains in the city. The first one we saw was an NS freight train on the Dayton District at the corner of Green and Scott Street, just west of LM Cabin. The train is crossing Interstate 315 with a nice backdrop of the city of Columbus. A little while after seeing this train here, we then saw an Ohio Central train on CSX's Columbus subdivision as it crossed the Scioto River. Once the train came to a halt, we then went down to the High Street Bridge, where we saw it again as it was entering into CSX's Parsons Yard. The Ohio Central System was a regional railroad that covered eastern Ohio and the Pittsburgh area of Pennsylvania. The railroad was founded in 1988 by Jerry Joe Jacobson. He was the railroad's chairman and chief executive officer. The railroad was operated in a similar manner to how the Chessie system was ran, but instead of having 3 roads, they had 10. The Ohio Central Railroad, the Ohio Southern Railroad, the Columbus and Ohio River Railroad, the Mahoning Valley Railroad, the Ohio and Pennsylvania Railroad, the Warren and Trumbull Railroad, the Youngstown and Austintown Railroad, the Youngstown Belt Railroad, the Pittsburgh and Ohio Central Railroad, and the Aliquippa and Ohio River Railroad. The railroad, thanks to Jacobson's love affair with steam, became well known for their operation of steam locomotives on their system. In 2008, Jacobson then sold the entire Ohio Central system to the Genesee & Wyoming Company, and with that came to an end of Ohio Central Steam. Jacobson used all the money from the sale to construct Age of Steam, a large 19th century roundhouse to house his steam engines he had acquired and operate them there. As of 2019, it looks like G&W's Ohio Central might be opening up to the idea of steam on their railroad, as Moorhead and Norfolk No. 12 has run to Sugar Creek near the end of 2019. But it's too early to tell whether or not if they're going to actually do anything bigger than that. So let's just keep our fingers crossed and see if maybe something comes out of it in the 2020s. After seeing the Ohio Central train, we then went up to Cook Road, where we saw a meet between a southbound NS grain train and a northbound NS intermodal train with BNSF power on the point. The Cook Road Railroad crossing is a great place to watch trains in Columbus, with both the Sandusky District and the Burt Line paralleling each other here. A majority of the action you'll see will be on NS, but you will see an occasional CSX train using the Burt Line. Combine it with great parking and 2 former New York Central signals, what more could you ask for? A little after seeing the meet here, we then caught a southbound NS freight train at the Weber Road Railroad crossing, as it goes from the Sandusky District to the beginning of the Dayton District, just south of the crossing. Thank you guys so much for sticking around here. We have reached the end of Part 3 in this grand celebration. Join us in Part 4 as we continue the grand celebration into 2015. Hope to see you there.